Hello, this video is for Kubit's path report, and it will cover basic functionality and how to interpret the results. You can find a path report on the left-hand nav under the report section of the product, and within a path, essentially what you're saying is, show me all the steps between a starting and ending event with applying some additional adjustments, group bys, filters, etc. When you first build a path report, you'll be greeted with this screen asking for a starting and ending event. This is going to be the first building block to make sure that your analysis fits your use case. In this case, I'm going to say, give me all users that started on a main landing and ended by starting a stream. Now these two events should be different, as a user doing a starting and the same ending event will just result in a single result. However, you do have options to add additional filtering here to give you insights around page view to page view with different page URLs or page titles. After you've selected your starting and ending event, you can determine if you want to look at this path forward or backward. When we say forward, what we mean is looking from the starting to the ending event. If we change it to backward, you'll see that they're inversed. Essentially, we'll understand how did users end up at a stream started event by those who started at a main landing. Also, you can select things like subjects, which are similar to funnels or retention reports. This is going to be the item that you're measuring the path of. In this case, we're looking at user IDs, but these could be anything from a session ID, anonymous user ID, device ID, etc., depending on what's in your Kubit instance. We also default to the SAN key mode, which we'll show you today, but at the end of this video, we'll also show you what top paths look like and where that can be most valuable. Under additional settings, we have a few more good things that you can customize here, again, depending on the use case. Partition is something that you may have seen in funnels as well, and this is essentially setting a time-bound parameter around when a user can perform a starting and ending event. We default to day or a 24-hour period. So essentially what we're saying is measure the starting to ending path within a single day for each user. If you want to be more specific, you may actually have a session ID here that you can select so that you're only looking at paths within the same session. Or you can simply say none, which will essentially say from the beginning of time, as far as I've selected it into the report, to the end of time, what events did they perform between these two? I'll get into more specifically about how that can look on the report and what different results might be. Lastly, you can also group these results by things starting or globally. The difference between this is starting is only going to break it down by the value in the first step of the funnel or path in this case. Globally will imply that every step will have to have the same value. Global is great if you have a persistent ID or checkout number, cart ID, etc., that you want to maintain consistency throughout every step of their path. Now, let's look quickly at what the results of this very simple path would be. Again, I'm looking at users who started on main landing and ended up on a stream started. Scrolling to the bottom here, we can see our path report displayed by nodes. When I say nodes, essentially these columns of events determining what ordinal position a user performed that event in. And we can understand volume based on the size and scale of the flow from left to right. So quickly how I would read this is we had 1,256 users perform main landing in the last day, which is my time period here. And of those, about 910 of them, or 72.45%, perform search content as a second event directly after main landing. As I hover over these, you can see that our journeys break out into more discrete, different events, and then carry on until they hit our final ending event, which in this case is stream started. So we can see that 50% of users perform stream started as their third event. We also have 143 users that do it immediately after main landing, and some more that take a little while to get there, if at all. In this case, these users took several steps to get to stream started and is only accounting for about 60 users within the total population. Now, as you can see here, as journeys branch out, we may have different users contributing to different steps. And so if the question more so becomes how many users went from search content to main landing again, rather than looking at this top number here, which is consistent of all users who performed main landing third, instead we can hover over this particular path coming from the nodes. We can see that all 910 users represented in the search content, 205 of them went to main landing as a next step, with a CVR or conversion rate of about 22%. So another way to interpret this would be 22% of users who did search content as their second event went on to perform main landing again as their third event. This is true for any path within one step to another, and it gives you a more breakdown view of the actual users flowing from one node to the next. We also have others here at the bottom, which is consisting of users who didn't do anything terribly significant and likely just need to get lumped into this others group. In this case, we have about 69 users, but this is easily expanded by using our arrow buttons up here at the top of the report. I can click it down to expand that other category and see the smaller concentration of individuals doing these less popular things like stream canceled as a first step, or 12 users in this case, and then where do they go next? If I select this path, it will stay highlighted, and I can see that they all more or less go back into stream started. Some of them cancel a stream once again. This is also true looking long ways. We default to the first 6 steps, but you can add additional steps to the end of your path up to 25. As you can see, the further out we look, the more mangled this journey becomes and less uniform. So it's pretty clear that if a user is going to start a stream, more often than not, or in this case 50% of the time, they're going to do it nearly immediately after they hit that main landing page. If I shrink my path again, I can even look just at these first 3 steps if I really want to get an understanding of where the majority of my users go at the very beginning of their journey. Now this is all very interesting, but what if the question becomes, how are users getting to a stream started event, but how do they get to it based on the category of that content? Or to speak another way, what content is driving the most engagement, and how do I visually represent that here? Within a path report, you can add adjustments. These are ways that you can manipulate the results of this path to give you more context. In this case, we're going to use our expand event option. And what this lets me do is pick an event that I'm interested in. In this case, we're going to pick stream started and expand it by a specific field so that I get more context about it. I'm going to pick category because that'll let me know what kind of content that user has started streaming. I'm going to re-execute my path now. And what I see instead of a single stream started event is now an indicator of what type of content they watched, or in this case, originals. So where this used to say 50% initially, now I know that 30% of those individuals were watching original content, and that's a large majority of what people are streaming as a third step. As you see, my other bucket also got a little bit bigger here, so I can go ahead and expand it a bit and see additional content like reality, trending, etc. You can continue to expand events depending on what your use case is. Oftentimes we see this be expanded by page title, category, product name, etc. You can also merge events. So if certain events within a single step more or less mean the same thing, I can select merge and pick several events, like let's say search content, and select profile as an example, and treat them as a single event. I can also even give them a new alias if I want to call it something else, like search or select. This can clean up your results and make it easier to distinguish patterns without having to muddy through a very high granularity count of events. The last one is folding events. This lets me treat events that happen often or frequently, one right after the other, as a single step in my path so that it's easier to understand. As an example, something like stream completed may be a backend event that fires fairly regularly or throughout the entire duration of the stream. I would rather just fold this all into a single event so that it's easy for me to understand when my results render. Additionally to these adjustments, you can use Kubit's basic report filtering and group by features here to give even more context to your results. In this example, let's look at possibly adding a breakdown here to understand if there's a discrepancy or a difference between apps. In this data set, apps can be interpreted as a platform, iOS versus Android. When I get my results back, now I essentially have two paths, one right next to the other. The iOS group, which is the solid color, and the Android group, which is the hashed. And this lets me see, do the paths between these two platforms differ very much of what users do first, second, third when they land on the platform? In this case, you can see that largely most users go from main landing to search content regardless of their platform, and it doesn't really differ very much until you get possibly further along in their journeys. If you have multiple groups, like let's say you have 5 different platforms, Android, iOS, CTV, etc., this becomes a drop-down caret, and you can change the comparison path to whichever other option you'd like. So, just to quickly summarize what we've discussed, we talked about building a path report and selecting our starting and ending events, as well as the different subjects and partitions that we care to look at, and deciding if we want to look at it forwards or backwards. We added a path adjustment to understand what category of content a user is streaming at the end of their path, and we broke it down by app to understand which platforms look slightly different depending on the journey. I hope this is helpful in understanding how to interpret and leverage our path reports. Please let us know if you have any questions.